Thank you. I'll go ahead and turn it over to you, and let me make sure I'm sharing this. Well, you're sharing this, so
Yeah,
we're all set.
great. Thank you, Paul, for having me over. Appreciate your service running around and trying to get everything set up. I was
Yep.
also applying a group chair, so I know exactly what that rush feels like to get everything in order. Hi, everyone. I'm here today on behalf of RideSD. I'll explain our organization in just a second. But before I do, I just want to provide some context on this discussion. You know, it seems that whenever I meet someone in the street or a restaurant or whatever, like if I talk to them for more than 20 minutes, the topic of parking comes up, and not in a positive way. And, you know, as someone also involved in, you know, city planning and transportation, parking is a common constituent, probably the most common constituent complaint across the whole city. So our organization focuses on transportation, and we want to, you know, talk to community groups like this one, pitch ideas, get feedback, and try to get us closer towards managing residential parking in a way that does not leave everybody incredibly frustrated, which seems to be where we are, or where some neighborhoods are heading. On top of that, I just want to specify this is specifically for residential areas. This does not include Adams Avenue or 30th or places with a lot of commercial activity. Residential permit parking is not always appropriate in those places because those places need their customers to park somewhere. So these ideas are specifically for residential areas. So we'll get into it. About RideSD, our mission is to improve transportation in San Diego through public education, community events, and grassroots organizing. So we've successfully advocated for improvements to public transit, such as being able to pay with your mobile wallet or credit card when boarding. We do public events that educate the public on transportation. It's hard to see the photo there, but that is one of the photos involves a tour of the MTS rail yard. So we take, you know, a few dozen folks once or twice a year to check out the MTS rail yards, the tours, the headquarters. We also, you know, do policy fellowships with graduate students to research solutions on local issues. So the ideas and, you know, being presented today were worked on by a graduate student from the University of Virginia. They're from Chula Vista, and they were with us these past few months to workshop ideas to address residential permit parking, or to address frustrations in residential neighborhoods. So let me explain what residential permit parking is. It's RPP for short, residential permit parking. It is a policy tool that regulates on-street parking by reserving it for residents of a defined area through the issuance of parking permits. These programs are typically designed to reduce congestion from non-resident parking, to preserve access for residents, and to manage limited curbside space. There are only so many parking spaces in a street. We have to manage it effectively unless we want it to be the situation it is today. So there are a few RPPs in the city. However, most of them serve the purpose of excluding people out. They don't actually manage parking within. So for example, the one in the college area, it serves the purpose of keeping SDSU commuters out, because people have to pay to park at SDSU, and a lot of them would try to park in their neighborhoods. That was a big problem. So they put a program in place to say, you know, no to that. However, I, you know, canvassed in the college area a few election cycles ago, and I would talk to people, what's your biggest complaint or issue in the neighborhood? And they would still say parking. And I would ask, well, why, you know, is that still an issue? You have a RPP program in place. Well, it turns out that, you know, anyone, or almost, there's no, you know, restriction on how the permits are distributed. The house with an empty nester with one car gets a permit, but the house next door with 5 SDSU students, they all get permits. And there's only 2 to 3 spaces in front of every house. So that house with 5 SDSU students just took up, you know, a lot of the parking spaces. And so there has to be a more intentional way of, you know, distributing permits. And that's what we want to talk about today. Similar for other parts in the city, Area A, which you can't see there, but it's Medical Complex, which is a sub-neighborhood of Uptown, and Hillcrest is next to it. There's also residences in that area. a lot of nurses and hospital workers will park in the residential areas. So they put this program in place. There's another one in Barrio Logan to prevent people visiting the ballpark from parking in their neighborhood. And then there's a niche case in Cortez Hill, which it just allows people to park at the meter longer than 2 hours. So those are the zones that currently exist in the city. But again, if people in those neighborhoods still deal with the issue of not having parking certainty and still struggling for a spot. So it helps that they keep people out, but it's still not solving frustrations. And this is where I want to get into a thing called the tragedy of the commons. It's often discussed in law school. Well, when you have a public resource, for example, the image here is a grassy field. If no one is managing that public resource and people are just allowed to use it without any, management, then after time, like this grassy field, it just ends up getting overused. And the field, for example, if people let their cows graze nonstop and there's no one managing saying how many cows can be at the time, and no one's saying like, hey, we need time to let the grass to regrow, then the grass gets all eaten up and the grassy field turns into, a dead area. So this is a common thing that happens for public resources that are not well managed. And we are, seeing that happen with street parking, because street parking is also a public resource that legally, on paper, everybody owns because the street is public right of way. More homes, however, are being built with no off-street parking. I'm sure y'all are well aware of that. Yet many residents moving into those homes with no private parking still choose to bring their cars into the neighborhood. This is, overburdening the street parking situation, And if we don't manage street parking as a public resource that it is, we will end up with our own tragedy of commons where there are just way too many people trying to park, way too many cars in the street that cannot sustain all of them. We jokingly call this Carmageddon in the slide. And this is something we want to avoid. Some neighborhoods we presented to, like North Park, they already feel like they're here. Other neighborhoods are worried that they'll get there. So we want to avoid this situation. And one thing I want to address too is the elephant in the room. There's an elephant if you can't see it on that photo, which is why don't we just require private parking in new developments? That would seem to solve the issue. Well, I'd like to go over some political realities around that. So first of all, state laws prohibit cities from enacting parking requirements for certain developments, including those near specific transit stops. And the city of San Diego actually does have parking minimums for areas where the state law doesn't apply. So the city still technically has parking minimums. It's just state laws override the city. And now the state legislature, including our own assembly members and senators, are very much moving full steam ahead with deregulating housing development. And that's not changing anytime soon. And unless you can, split the legislature in the next year or two, which would be a very difficult thing to do. And buildings with little to no parking will continue to be built in the immediate future. And to further stress that political reality, I have a photo here which is hard to see of all the leading Democratic governors at a California DMV forum. And they were all there talking about how they were going to continue, deregulating and cut red tape to support more housing development. So these are all the leading Democratic governors. So assuming a Democrat wins, we're not going to have a state legislature that's going to be interested in, reversing the laws that are allowing folks to build no private parking. So I just want to communicate that political reality because our organization wants to work on solutions that fit that political reality. So a solution is improved residential permit parking system for the city of San Diego. So let me get into that. But first, how can we better design the one that we have? And before I get into that, I want to share some goals that our organization has for a new and improved residential permit parking system. Key, first and foremost, is to provide parking certainty for residents. if you're driving home at 11 at night, there's going to be a parking spot for you in your neighborhood. You're not going to circle the block for 20 minutes and park half a mile away. There will be a spot. So parking certainty is what we're calling it. We want that to be an outcome of this new program. We also want to mitigate the impact of new housing with no private parking. And we also, an aspirational goal is to reduce traffic, which we will get into that as well. So these are the goals that our organization is working with in proposing solutions. So our proposed solution, and again, this is not, the end all be all, we are wanting to start a conversation, is to have the city adopt a new RPP program that, one, caps the number of permits to match the number of spaces on the street. And second of all, allows residents in the neighborhood to design how that program works, to design choose how the permits are distributed and how visitor parking is managed. So let's get into how that would look like. So first of all, what we call this neighborhood choice, RPP. To initiate this, we envision that it would start by residents doing a petition and going around saying, we want a residential permit parking zone in the neighborhood. Once they get a certain amount of signatures, they turn that into the city, and then the city then mails every resident a ballot. And the ballot will have a few questions. Questions such as, do you want this in your neighborhood? Yes or no? Questions on how they would like the permits distributed, and questions on how they would like visitor parking managed. Then everybody would fill out this ballot, return it by a deadline. The city would then tally up the results, present it to city council, and then city council would vote to create the new zone or not in accordance with the preference that's outlined by the neighborhood. So it will be hard to see from there, but I had an example ballot. Well, you can zoom into that, go to the top. So example ballot, first question is, should your neighborhood have residential permit parking? Yes or no, fill one. Second, how should parking permits be distributed? And we propose having a set of options for people to pick, option 1, option 2, option 3, 4, 5, 6, and they can rank them. So rank number 1 being your most favorite, down to 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And then next question. We also propose a priority question saying, should priority for permits be given to people who are dependent on a car for work, education, training, healthcare, caregiving, or livelihood? This would be verified with documentation. And then yes or no to that question, if you want to have that be a priority in your neighborhood. SDSU does something similar for their undergrads living on campus, typically the first years. If they're not allowed to bring a car their first year, however, if they can prove that they need a car for their healthcare, caregiving, livelihood, then SDSU has a process where it's like, submit this type of documentation and we'll review it and approve you and give you a permit if that's the case. So there are examples of that being done in the past. So that's an example ballot for questions about residential parking. We also have here an example ballot for questions on visitor parking. So Paul, if you may zoom in. The first question being, how much visitor parking should be designated for visitors only? We have a few options there, 5%, 10%, 15%, or other, for you to fill in some other percentage. Next question. Should this zone have designated spots for visitors? So there's two ways to do visitor parking, right? You could have designated spaces, like maybe there's one space at the end of your street saying visitor only, or you can allow visitors to park anywhere and someone has to print a permit for them. So that's two options. If they select yes here, it means they want the designated spots. If they vote no, then they want the printing a pass for them. And then another question, how long should visitors be allowed to park? And then we have 30 minutes, 1 hour, 2 hours, other there as well. So it's an example of what a ballot could look like, asking folks, how they want visitor parking managed in their neighborhood. And a key component for success, at least with the goals that we have in mind, particularly for parking certainty, is capping the number of permits to match the number of spaces on the street, right? That's the only way we can make that certainty possible. Because if there are more permits than spaces, then there will be some people left out who won't have a spot. People who don't receive a permit would be on the wait list and receive a permit as spaces become available according to the distribution process voted on by the residents. So the intended impact, again, create parking certainty and peace of mind for residents. You know, you're not going to come home late at night, circle the block for a long time and park really far away. It's like, you know, there will be a space in your zone. Second of all is to prevent the Carmageddon situation that we described. Say a new building with no private parking is built in the neighborhood, but your neighborhood has neighborhood choice RPP. So all the permits have already been distributed. There is a wait list. So if a new high-rise gets built with no parking in it, people can move into it, but they'll be on the wait list. So they can't bring their car right away to the neighborhood. And that helps solve that issue of, okay, you know, a new development came in with no parking and they're going to bring new cars. They're going to bring, you know, a lot of cars in. That solves that issue. And, you know, a lot of these new developments are touted as making a car-free life possible. Well, we view this as putting that, you know, promise into reality. Like, okay, developer, you are saying that people can live without a car, developer or city, whoever it is, you can live without a car. Well, let's put your money where your mouth is, and your new folks moving in, they'll be on the wait list. They won't be able to bring their car right away. And then third of all, we hope that this can help reduce traffic because those new folks, you know, moving into the neighborhood, won't bring their car, at least not right away, until they get out the wait list. And so they'll be walking, biking, taking transit, and intentionally moving into that neighborhood, knowing that I am moving into this neighborhood, knowing that I need to walk, bike, or take transit to move around. So that prevents more cars from getting on the street, unless they use like a private lot nearby. So that is, I want to get into the possible permit distribution options, and we're very much open to feedback on what these options could look like. We have some very basic ones here. Like, first of all, you can do first come, first serve. You could do a lottery, basically random, everybody applies. You could like maybe do an auction, which, you know, I'm not personally a fan of. You could sell them at a market value via a lottery. You could sell them at market value via first come, first serve. You could try to do something like one per household, and then there's more than that, then the rest goes on to lottery. And, you know, those are some potential options that we're like thinking of, very basic stuff like, you know, so if there will be discussion on this, we would like to hear ideas on options to how these permits should be distributed. And again, residents would be voting on these, so they would have their ballot, 6 options, and they would rank 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, which ones they like the most. So we want to make sure that there's good options on the table for residents to rank. And we also propose some extra measures to make sure this gets implemented better. One is maximizing the number of spaces on the street by marking T's on the ground. T's delineate where a parking spot is, because right now, if you allow people to just park, you know, willy-nilly, people will leave different amounts of spaces between the cars, and those spaces can add up to, you know, entire parking spots. So if the city were to mark spaces on the street with T's, as they're called, parking T's on the ground, they can ensure that there's always a maximum number of spaces on the street at any given time. Second of all, we propose allowing people to park in front of their own driveway. You know, this will bring more spots into the neighborhood, but this parking would only be reserved for the household, right? And you could do that, for example, giving that household a placard that they can put on their car that corresponds to their house, or if they want, they can give that placard to a guest, and the guest can park in front of their own driveway. And a meter maid could come check the placard and see if it corresponds to the residence. A third idea that we want folks and the city to consider is allowing residents to call a tow truck if there is a violator. So this exists in apartment complexes. If someone parks in your spot, or someone is not who doesn't have a permit to park in a complex, they can be towed with a tow truck, right? We've heard from other planning groups that this could encourage like an HOA culture of like policing each other. So we're also open to discussion on that. But we want to, these things could help, you know, keep the program running better. So that is the presentation, and I'm happy to take questions and discussion as led by Paul here.
Sure. So for questions and discussions, I'm going to ask that you preface, are you making a comment? Oh, and please keep it brief. And or are you asking a question? Also, please keep it brief. So we'll start here, and then I'll move to Matthew, and then Ramey, and I'll see how we go.
All right, well, I have a lot to say, so I apologize. I'm not going to keep it brief. Thank you for the presentation. I really think you have a lot of provocative ideas here. I really do like the idea of putting in teeth in the parking and also allowing people to park in front of their driveways. I think those are great ideas. The towing idea, I lived in an HOA where I actually had a board member of the HOA tow someone she didn't like. So yes, I think that's a terrible idea. In terms of parking, as you were talking, if you think about who parks in the neighborhoods who aren't residents or their visitors, they're patrons and employees of the businesses on Adams Avenue, right? And the problem is they have nowhere else to park because most of those businesses don't have their own parking or they have very little parking. And this is what's different with the parking area in Hillcrest or the one by the university is that the university has parking, right? People just don't want to pay for it. And the hospital in Hillcrest has parking. People just don't want to pay for it. They park in the residential street. So it's okay to push them off the streets because they have somewhere else to go. Patrons for businesses on Adams Avenue have nowhere else to go. So I'd be really concerned with any parking permit thing in this neighborhood because it would really, I think it'd be really devastating. And I'm not sure what the solution to that is because there is no other place for them to actually park. And I think more generally, even though I like the idea of a parking permit area, I think that the practically what ends up happening is that you end up with a lot of empty spaces, especially if you set aside like spaces for visitors. If visitors aren't there, they're empty. Or during certain times of the day, they'll be just empty, and then people have to park elsewhere. And I think that I see a lot of problems practically with actually doing that. Again, I think it works a lot better like around the university or in Hillcrest because people have somewhere else to go. But people don't have anywhere else to go here. And that leads actually to my question, and I have a lot more to say, but I'll let other people talk first. My question is that would a parking structure somewhere in the neighborhood be financially viable? Like if someone were to build a parking structure on Adams Avenue, could they actually like make it pencil out? Because that's really what we need for the businesses on Adams Avenue. Because if we did that, then you can have a parking permit in the residential neighborhoods because the people doing the businesses actually have someplace to park. I have more to say, but I'll let other people talk. So,
yeah, and to answer your question about would a parking structure on Adams be financially viable? If those people coming to Adams weren't allowed to park in the neighborhood, yes, it would be viable. But as long as it's free to park in the neighborhood, no one's going to park in the structure. So maybe you could do both at the same time. You build the structure, implement the zone, and the customers can't park in the neighborhood, but they do have an option now. They can't say they don't have an option.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
If I could just add the cost, like an above ground parking, so it's probably off because inflation, but the last I heard, it's like between 20 to 30,000 a space. Just when you talk about like construction costs.
Right, yeah,
Just
if they charge you $4 an hour or whatever, or how much parking would they need to have there or to actually make back their money, right? So.
Yeah, and would folks be fine with the high-rise parking structure on Adams? That's also another question.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Let's go to Matthew on Zoom.
I agree 100% with Brian on that. Parking structure is probably the best bet, at least for our neighborhood in specific, and not having developers continue to create developments without any parking. But I have two questions. If you cap the amount of permits that are given out based on how many spots are on the road, does that mean all current renters in a building have to just fight over one? Or is everyone out of luck, hypothetically, if you do a lottery and nobody gets it? Like, how would it work if a building of renters already has cars and have lived in the neighborhood for years? That's the first question, I guess. And then I'd imagine you just have like swaths of renters just voting no on any RPP program if they're told all of a sudden you can't quote unquote have your car anymore. So do you have any thoughts on the renters and people leaving the neighborhood?
Yeah, so the renters would also receive a ballot, and they would also rank the preferred option that they want the permit to be distributed with, right? And, again, the options are still being worked out, but it is possible for some options to favor, certain groups over others. But what will happen, the people will vote on the options, rank them, city will tally the results, and then implement the option highest rated. And, if there is a situation in which there are over too many cars trying to park in a neighborhood, like for example, North Park, then when the permit is implemented, some people will not get the permit. And that is the price to pay for parking certainty, is that there's only so many spaces, you have to manage it. We all voted on how to distribute the spaces. We're going to implement it now. So there will be, depending on the distribution process selected, there folks will, especially if there's already too many cars trying to park, some folks will be left without a permit.
Go to Ramey, then Andrew, and then Richard,
Got some over here too.
and then we'll come back into the room. So Ramey, please go ahead.
So my question is around our festivals, and I don't necessarily mind people coming into our festivals to park on our streets. What I do mind is that they race up and down our streets and don't really care about this neighborhood and what they're doing to it by going 50 miles an hour. So if you implement this, are you going to work with the city so the city finally does something where like you have to go to the stadium and park there and then be shuttled up here during the festivals? Or is that just going to be one of those things that falls to the wayside?
Do you know what festival? Or is that music festival?
Is that Alexander Street Fair?
Okay.
Folks are come out of this community center, so we probably have to be coordinated with those festival organizers. And the idea of shuttling people in has come up before, and it probably should come up again.
That sounds like a good idea.
Yeah, and that's surge, right? So I think we're talking about residents, and then this would be special event.
Yeah.
Rockwell Marathon would probably be another one. So might lose some spaces during a time where guest spaces might get consumed. But eventually these festivals, and we'll have to make some sort of facility for bringing people in, public transit, Padres bus, something like that.
Gotcha.
Raymond, does that kind of answers your question? I see your hands down. Let's.
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure that was on the focus.
Okay, and Andrew.
Yeah, so from petition to ballot measure to the ballot measure being passed, to actually implementing and getting feedback from the community. Because I think a lot of the questions are, well, am I just gonna overnight no longer be able to use my car? How long did that process take?
Yes, so what we envision is, let's go back to the part where the city mails out the ballots, right? Give them a deadline, say 2 months, wait 2 months. Ideally, the city should check in with people who have not returned one yet, then another one, have someone go, knock on the door, say, hey, you haven't submitted your ballot yet, please submit it. Then the city tallies up the results, it takes, say, a month, goes to city council, gets agendized for discussion, goes to committee, then full council discussion, and then that's another forum for folks to come out to the committee hearings or the council hearings to also voice their thoughts. And that could take, months, potentially. And then let's say council does approve the program, Now the city will mail everyone out an application corresponding with the distribution process that was selected, right? So like, hey, this is happening, everyone, here's an application, here's what was selected as a distribution process. Submit your application by this deadline, say 2 months. 2 months come by, the city should go and follow up with people who did submit it, the application, knock on their door, send another letter, wait another month. After that, the city should then mail out all the permits and put a sign in the neighborhood saying like residential permit parking, and incoming, not right away. Like give it, like I want to say 3 months of having signs in the neighborhood saying that on this date, 3 months from now, this will become effective and you will need a permit to park here going forward. And this just provides a very, very long runway for people to work into it. And if for some reason somebody missed the petition, the ballot, the follow-up on the ballot, the application, the follow-up on the application, I find it really hard to believe that they would miss the signs in the neighborhood, posted metal signs saying, hey, in 3 months, this will be implemented, and so, yeah, so the people who did not get a permit will have a very long runway to, come up with an alternative, solution on how to move around the neighborhood and parking.
Okay. I wanna go, let's bounce into the room. Go ahead.
This came out of a university. I can't believe the fallacies you're operating under. The idea, if you tell people, hey, don't bring a car, they're not gonna bring a car. Have you seen North Park? It's jammed. And the idea that people are going to vote to restrict their parking. The main thing that the main comment I have is the idea of your political reality that parking spaces are a thing of the past. Personally, how are you gonna charge your electric car if you don't have enough street park? And that's an interesting fallacy. We're not gonna have electric cars. But a parking space is worth $40,000. If you buy a condo, they go in addition, $40,000 for a parking place. And that $40,000 has been gobbled up. Every parking space has been gobbled up by real estate developers who fund our Democratic governors that you point out there very handsomely. The current one not being the exempt from this. And just the idea of limiting development for transportation is you've got to come up with a better plan. In Europe, they have parking places. Parking lots, and people will ride their bike from their house to the parking lot. Or the parking lots are around the ample train stations. So your presentation is just full of flaws. I mean, the idea that real estate interests can have the parking places so that they can develop their infill. I've been following this for 25 years. My main issue is sweeping the street for sanitary reasons, and you can't sweep the street if it's totally parked up. Anyway,
Sounds like
the
you're,
main point is that this is a very sore point of limiting the parking places. Where are people gonna charge their electric car?
Well, I appreciate you sharing that. Not everyone has electric cars. I don't even own a car.
That explains it. That might color your point of view.
Yeah, but here's the thing.
A lot of people do.
I want to follow up when you said that. Who would vote yes? And we're proposing an idea here to voters, which is, do you want parking certainty in your neighborhood? Yes or no?
That's a fallacy.
If you
Because there
vote,
will not be parking certainty.
well, if there's 100 spaces and then there's 100 permits and 100 people get it, those 100 people have a certain, they know, there's 100 spots, there's 100 permits, I have one of those, that means when I drive to my neighborhood, there will be a spot for me.
you doing?
Well,
You're in luck.
It's said as somebody who doesn't have a car.
Yeah.
So somebody, you've got a spot, somebody parks in that spot.
I'm gonna go move to,
I
move to Richard on Zoom, and I'm gonna come back into the room.
And then Paul,
And I'm-
I'm over here thinking.
Yeah, and I'm seeing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
I'm gonna walk on.
And then we're gonna put you on the committee for parking as well. Cause we
You know,
need
I beg the city to be on the parking committee.
opposition
Committee.
council.
I've been to some of those meetings and I've seen the real estate interests just say, no, there's money to be made by taking over city parking, you know, like your little pasture. Some people overgraze, some people are overgrazing our parking.
They certainly are.
Thank you very much. I just disagree with your positions. Strong.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And Richard, you're up.
Thank you. The only question that I had was if you could provide some examples of what the options would be on the ballot to choose amongst. Because in my mind, I'm having a hard time coming up with sensible things to give people an option to vote on. And I was wondering what has worked or things that are going to be excluded from the options because they have been shown not to work.
yeah, thanks for that question. So we're still seeking public input on what those options could be. We had some pretty basic ones in a previous slide. Those included first come, first serve, you know, selling the permits, first come, first serve. Another option, if you put a price to it, that will disincentivize some people from paying. A lottery was another option, you know, just randomly send them out. And we also did propose having a question on the ballot saying, should people dependent on their car for education, work, employment, livelihood, caregiving, and healthcare, should they be prioritized for a permit? That was a question that we proposed separately on the ballot that we recommend having on the ballot as well. So those were some options. Again, not an exhaustive list, and we're hoping to get other ideas on that too.
Okay,
Now-
so we're sure we can squeeze all this. Oh, go ahead.
In considering the options, I guess I also don't really know what the balance is between if you're going to put the T marks in on the street, how many spaces are available in Normal Heights versus how many, I don't know what a good proxy for the number of people that need to have a or would like to have a parking space, but like the number of T spaces per bedroom or something like that. I mean, do we already have a deficit in that regard?
That's a good question.
We probably don't have as many parking spaces as we have bedrooms, but that would be a good analysis. In time, I want to finish up this at 8, so we have about 10 minutes. I've got Teresa, Jen, I've been waiting on Zoom and in the room. Let me get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, so we got 5 there, and then we'll come back to Matthew if we've got time. Let's start with Teresa on Zoom.
Hi, thanks for including me and letting me in your presentation and just offering some different ideas for the parking challenges here in Normal Heights. So I'm just, I have a couple questions. How often are permits reviewed? So I know it sounds like there's this ballot measure, timeline to be ironed out from petition to approval by city. But is it, and then the voting is at a single point in time. So it's just the people in the neighborhood at that moment. That changes. We have a lot of rentals in Normal Heights. So the demographics and the people in the neighborhood continue to change. So I'm just wondering, is the voting a one and done? And also is the permit review process kind of one and done. Like it meets my needs now, and 20 years from now, maybe I have a caregiver, maybe I need an extra permit, like those types of things. Just want to consider like the implications for enacting this, and then down the road, if you choose to stay in the neighborhood, kind of what does that look like for an aging population? And then just a simple, like, what happens if you take your car to the dealer, you get your car serviced and they give you a loaner car? Does that mean now I can't park by my house? That's it for now.
Yeah, really good question, especially the loaner one. I'm going to think about that one. For your first question on how are these essentially like monitored? We envision an annual, renewal process for the permits. First of all, do you still live here? If you moved out, then your permit should go back into the pool for someone on the wait list. So we do imagine a yearly renewal process for the permits.
And I think, just as a point of clarification, she was asking about, the signature petition vote process. This is not up for city council, and, we're not gonna see this on an election ballot anytime soon. This is the foundling stages, correct?
Yeah, this would not be an election ballot. This would be a separate ballot sent to every residence in accordance to the timeline.
Kind of like we do the maintenance assessment districts.
Like the maintenance assessment districts, like the business improvement districts, they mail out ballots.
Would be pushed from the community to city council, and city council would then manage the process of making it a city policy or I guess a city code. But this isn't something that's coming to us from the state or from the city. It would only be driven from the communities.
Yeah, a petition and ballot by the community.
I think next is, let's bounce into the room.
Hi, thank you for the presentation. Implementation or, deciding who has access to, the permits. I used to live in the city of Berkeley, which had a long-standing RPP program. And also, interestingly, I served as the interim city parking manager for about 9 months. So, one thing that they did in regards to Senate Bill 2097, which removes the parking minimums for new developments within a half mile of a major transit hub. One thing that was implemented was restricting new developments that are located within those transit areas, prohibiting residents of those new developments access to RPP. Because to be honest, we know that Normal Heights, North Park, we're gonna continue developing. We're gonna see more of these, 7-story plus apartment buildings. And the idea is that if developers come in and they want to take advantage of a zero parking minimum so that they could maximize unit count, then it's their responsibility as part of their marketability of those units to tell future residents, you're not going to be eligible for parking. The idea being you're in a major transit hub, you have access to other modes. And that's a condition of approval for their building permit. And, before a certificate of occupancy is issued, they have to make it clear to applicants of the building and residents, you will not have access to the RPP. So that's just kind of future proofing the growth of a neighborhood. So just something to consider, and I would be happy to connect with you. This sounds like a really interesting study that you guys are doing, and I know that it's very preliminary stages, but I'm really curious, to connect.
Yeah, love to connect. I'm glad to hear Berkeley took that route. We are trying to go in the same direction with, having the RPP, if all the permits are distributed, a new building comes in, those new residents will be on the wait list, so they also can't bring their cars in. So we're going at it from a different direction, but I appreciate you sharing how Berkeley went at it, that direction. So I'd love to connect more.
I'm gonna bounce back into Zoom with Jen. And then we'll start in the corner.
Yeah, thanks. I'm a homeowner in Normal Heights, and I am very clear that this is going to be a very preliminary, early study. So, as a nonprofit, is it that you have not implemented this RPP program with any other communities that are in San Diego? Is my first question. And this would be your first attempt at trying to do such a process.
Yeah, this new version of RPP that we're envisioning has not been implemented anywhere. So we've only been going around to community planning groups, stakeholder groups, groups that care about planning and development and presenting to them. So that's the only progress we've made so far.
Okay. And then a follow-up question I have too as well is there was discussion about ballots being submitted, reviewed, counted, reconnect with phone calls or other communication, other policies. I currently work for the state of California, and do you understand that the resources at the state level are very restricted based on budget restrictions that currently are within the financial constraints of the state budget and its lack of balance and how to rebalance a budget every year? Within the city of San Diego, the same problems exist to where staff time has limitations. Also, as well, they're understaffed or overloaded with workloads. And therefore, the city budgets themselves have a struggle with currently keeping up with the city resources that are we all are dependent upon, let alone an additional workload of the ballot measures, review, contact, communication, staff time. So one thing to consider is that the state and city budgets are not getting any better. The level of resources, of time and money is not getting any greater. And therefore, an extra workload of review and ballot budget would have to be something to be considered just in terms of implementing possibly this community at the community level permits. So just that's a comment. And so that would need to be very well vetted, worked in with our city struggles to pave roads, fix sewers, let alone to tee all the streets and parking as an additional task for the city maintenance crews. So just to say that there might be also higher level responsibilities that would need to be vetted in terms of the process of doing something on signage, streets, posting, teeing things, checking permits, all those items. So I know I took a lot of time, but one last question I have is related to the issuance of permits, is to consider that possibly owners and or landlords should be the contact individuals versus renters who may come and go or be short-term and or not live at an address very long, not be registered at an address. So consideration possibly to look at more of the people that are owning the properties that they're renting in terms of applying for permits for their residents in their multi-use SD, the ADU units, those types of items. And if that's part of the consideration versus the tenant who are coming and going in and out of communities.
That's a very interesting point. Thank you for bringing it up. We're going to look further into that. And to your comment about the budget, we definitely have been thinking about that. And we've been meeting with people who've implemented RPP in other cities. to try to gauge estimates on how much should the city expect to budget for this. And then, of course, there's a whole execution and process about it, and we're, you know, right now just working under the assumption of an efficient, well-run city, but, you know, I'll leave it at that. But I appreciate you bringing up those points, especially the last one. The last one's a very thoughtful one, so thanks.
Thank you.
Let's see, one. We go 1, 2, 3, and then Matthew, and we're out. So that's 4. We're gonna go over time. Please go ahead.
Little key things on the street tonight, only because just so that people park in the right spot, because I too often where a small car, I take up 2 spaces. That's ridiculous. I've got, I have neighbors who are responsible, they park in their driveway, park 2 vehicles in their driveway and or their garage. I have other neighbors who park on the street. Their long driveway is completely empty. Their garage is empty or full of stuff. But people, it would have been nice to have heard a neighborhood scenario rather than a college or a university. A neighborhood scenario whereby the driveway or the garage is also included in how many, included in the count of how of parking spaces that people should use. They used to speak first because it's convenient, not a problem with itself and the best. And in terms of enforcement, I didn't hear, or maybe I missed it, how this would all be enforced regarding, you know, how long the visitor would stay and permitting and how many parking spaces you get. Because right now, police don't do anything and enforcement doesn't do anything. So I don't know how anybody's gonna do, how this is gonna make that aspect any better.
Yeah, well, I appreciate your first 2 points. Those are good things to think about. On the enforcement part, I hear you on police don't come, which is why we had proposed the idea of letting folks be able to call a tow truck in their neighborhood. But then again, folks have other concerns with that because it could result into a more hostile neighborhood environment.
Exactly. I mean, I think I needed somebody, I actually had one guy beat on my door.
Yeah.
Because I reported mine, do not disturb that.
Okay. John.
In all this that you're figuring out, you're trying to figure out with the number of spaces. Did anybody stop and think about that the new state law has taken 8 parking spaces from every intersection? And you've got fire hydrants, which they just keep whittling down the number of spaces, which should be considered in anything that any scenario you come up with.
Absolutely. We're aware that once the city comes out and takes a close look, some spaces will be whittled down, which is why we propose marking the T's and allowing parking in your own driveway, because that'll bring more spaces online.
You can park in front of a driveway, but most cars are wider or longer than the driveway entrance.
That's another consideration thing to bring up.
Yes.
Yeah. I love the proposal, actually, the utter common sense of let's have as many permits as there are spaces. There's something rather basic and sensible about that. The other thing, and this is a comment, we're clearly hearing that this plan is subject to the law of unintended consequences. There are going to be all kinds of unintended consequences. But what I was thinking about was that if a developer knows that they can't, that they're not constrained by the city or the state to put in parking spaces. But on the other hand, if they don't have parking spaces, that tends to drive away a certain amount of their probably upper end clientele. And I wonder if that restriction, the set of restrictions might actually be a driver and might incentivize developers to add parking spaces in new buildings.
Yeah, so I've been talking, that's a good question. I've been talking to some other folks in urban development, and they think that this could have the consequence of making development less attractive in a neighborhood. If they know, if I build a building here, and there's RPP, my tenants will be on the wait list, so they won't be able to bring a car. That makes my units less attractive. So there is the potential consequence of if you do it here in Normal Heights to make development less attractive.
And it's kind of an elegant solution. You don't need the fund from the state or the city, but just the economics of it might drive in the direction you want to go.
Exactly. And we also did hear that this would incentivize, one, private parking development, and two, private parking structure development. As a way. So again, these are all, I'm just talking with folks in urban development. This is like all theoretical. No one's done research studies, but people who work in development have these hunches that like, oh, I can see a developer that would make me less attracted to developing there. And I could also see how it would make me incentivized to build underground parking. So those conversations are being had, but there's no concrete data that I found.
I'll throw in a comment. I was in Glasgow last year and parking in the north, in the very sort of nice east end near the university, older homes. And they have a parking warden that is actually part of their parking assignment. So they have individual assigned stalls per unit. And then they have somebody who walks in the neighborhood. And so that's a job. So they actually created a job from that. And it's been pretty successful. I think what they're dealing with right now, what's called rat runners, which are the people who would, in our neighborhood, would be cutting down Collier to avoid traffic on Adams. So they're working out how to solve that right now. Let's go to Kenny, and I'm gonna go to Matthew, and we'll wrap up.
Thank you. Did I hear you correctly that because we have care less about parking? I'm not, you introduced it in your presentation, so I have a curiosity about the data you have. If we had Republic, what would be different?
So on the point of, first of all, the state legislature, I mentioned that the state legislature as a whole, including a lot of Republicans, are moving in the direction of passing bills to spur more housing development. Then I gave the example of the Democratic governor candidates speaking at a housing forum about how they would spur more development. I have not seen Republican candidates at a similar forum. If I had, I would have included it. I hope that answered your question. I was not trying to make it inherently that Democrats want no off-street parking. But that's just I just wanted to give an example of, hey, these are the potential governors. One of these will probably be the governor this year. And here's what this person were saying. So
thank you for that answer. It doesn't really address my concern. All the research I can find shows that Republicans are actually more restrictive, which means I think we'd have less parking. Again, I'm curious why. I get that you chose that. Saying that they're not talking about it doesn't mean they're not thinking about it. So
yeah,
and you introduced politics into this, and my research shows me calling out a group for doing it wrong doesn't seem to be accurate. I can't with art, but I see a balance. Really, please don't tell anybody else.
I say I'm within.
Can you see how that reads that way? If that's the only data you present. If you're gonna present political data, you gotta, our data here shows this, and our data here shows that. But what you did for me, can't speak for anybody else. I kind of stopped listening to people on either side if they only present one. I mean, you're in the early stages, so your presentation is clean and clear, and I find you engaging to listen to, and I stopped listening to you after that.
Got the needle scratch.
Yeah, we only get one side. Not interested in it. Just for your own.
We're gonna wrap up with Matthew, and then I'm gonna leave any other questions for part two, because I have a feeling that you'll be back. And I'm gonna touch base and see where this is at. And I think look, there's some board discussion I want to have, after this. So Matthew, go ahead and, finalize our question and answer session.
Awesome, thank you. I have two quick comments and then a question. Someone had mentioned that it'd be important to let residents of new developments with zero parking know that they don't have any access to the parking program. I think it'd be interesting to see what large developers do if they know that the renters aren't going to have any access to it. And then I think the second comment is, I think my biggest issue is how many spots are permitted hasn't been explicitly mentioned. So it seems right now like it's a toss up whether you'll get a permitted spot in an entire neighborhood or not. I don't see many renters saying yes to it. Like a hypothetical, maybe you only have the first block off of Main Street, like Adams, is permitted, where it's pretty much just renters. Those residents could hypothetically get their parking by their homes, but if all of those spots are taken and they don't have a permit, they at least can park a block away. So I'm curious, will the spaces that will be permitted be designated on the petition of the ballot? Like, will you explicitly say, here's what spaces and how many spaces and where they will be on the petition or ballot?
Oh, you're breaking up there.
To repeat my question.
If I heard that correctly.
It was will what spaces that will be permitted be on the petition or ballot?
So for the question of, if I understood correctly, like, will your permit correspond to a spot?
I think
no,
just like the question kind of jumps. So, Matthew, I think the process itself is defined in the balloting process, where the community has to decide what sort of options they want to see the community vote on. So the idea of a single spot assigned to a single household or person, that all of those details are very nebulous right now. This is in a discovery phase. So I don't think there's anything that's concrete in terms of what's being presented. It's just the idea that we, as a community, could do an assigned parking spot and have some sort of restrictions around it, if that's a fair interpretation. And Matthew, I don't know if does that answer your question?
Yeah, that's super helpful.
Oh, okay. Okay. Then at this point, I'm gonna, I just want to have a discussion with the board, because we are constrained, so we can't have these conversations in the alleyway, which I would much prefer. But I'd like to just propose the idea that this might be something we want to look at as a pilot program in Normal Heights, where we would say to the city, hey, we would like to try this out for a year and see what happens, or maybe in a limited area, maybe those places adjacent to Adams